Good evening, all distinguished speakers here. It's a great honor for me to present to you all Dr. Patrick McCarthy as our guest speaker today. Dr. McCarthy is an internationally recognized medical hypnosis specialist. He has treated over 20,000 people and he has helped them live their life in health and wellness. He is a fellow of New Zealand College of General Practitioners. He is member of the New Zealand Medical Association. He holds diploma from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He has diploma in clinical hypnosis from New Zealand, and he has also been past president of New Zealand Society of Hypnosis. There are many achievements and accolades to Dr. McCarthy. He has also authored a book, very interesting, How to Cure Anxiety in Just 5 Therapy Sessions. Today's topic for Dr. McCarthy is again very interesting one. He is going to talk about making the hypnosis intake session memorable. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much. Now, when I started in hypnosis, I was the only medical hypnotist in New Zealand. And I'm still the only full-time medical hypnotist in New Zealand. And what I decided was that I would have to come up with my own brand of hypnosis. Now, from general practice, from medicine, I was a fan of informed consent. But for hypnosis, I decided to use what's called my fiduciary duty. Now, fiduciary duty is where the patient sets the goal, and my job is to get them there. And in that way, I become a bit like a taxi driver. Now, the taxi driver only ever has one question. Where do you want to go? Not where have you been, not where have you come from. And they don't want to know where you don't want to go. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to be worried. The taxi driver wants to know where you want to go. So I came up with a signature opening question, which was, what do you want to change? Not what's your problem, which is talking about the past, but what do you want to change? Talking about the future. And most people answer by saying, I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to be worried. I don't want to be, and I say, okay, I'm a taxi driver. If you tell me you don't want to go to Johnsonville, you don't want to go to Petone, that's no use. You got to say, I want to go to the airport, or I want to go to X or Y or Z. And eventually they will come up in the first couple of minutes by saying, oh, I'd love to be relaxed and calm whenever I want. And then I say, well, 25 years ago, I said to my wife, I'm starting in hypnosis and I can cure a broken ankle and I can cure a pneumonia. So I want to be able to cure anxiety. And she said, but I've seen it written, there is no cure for anxiety. I said, and the people who write that have never found a cure. So why can't I be the first one to find one? And she said, well, where are you going to start? And I said, well, what if they're always been asking the wrong question? And she said, well, what do you mean the wrong question? I said, what if they're asking one of the big 5 W's? Why do I become anxious? Thousands and thousands of answers to why. What makes me anxious? Thousands and thousands of answers. Where, when, and who gets anxious? Thousands and thousands of answers. But what if we ask the question, how? How is the mechanism of anxiety. And it turns out there are not thousands of mechanisms to anxiety. There is only ever one mechanism. And if you can discover that mechanism, you can perhaps discover what's called the counter mechanism, the opposite to not that causes the problem, not the conscious, not the central nervous system. It's the autonomic nervous system that causes anxiety. Now, the autonomic nervous system has essentially two kinds of nerves: sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic works like the accelerator in the car, and parasympathetic works like the brake pedal. So which one do you reckon causes anxiety, the accelerator or the brake pedal? And the answer, of course, is the accelerator. That's the mechanism. Sympathetic overactivity is what causes anxiety. That's it. This has been known by doctors for close on 100 years. And all the treatments for anxiety are therefore based at reducing this. Have a beer, take a chill pill, go for a walk, do a bit of yoga. And all they ever do is take 20 or 30% off the top. But the only possible way to bring the car to a stop is to switch on the brake pedal, the parasympathetic. And my wife said, well, what drugs turn on the parasympathetic? And I said, as far as I know, there's none. That's the holy grail of pharmacology. So all I have to do is figure out how to switch on the parasympathetic. And she said, well, how long will that take? And I said, who knows? 1 year later, I'd figured out how to produce parasympathetic predominance. And I was ecstatic, jubilant. But my wife said, okay, but how does the sympathetic become overactive? And I said, oh no, this is where all the W's come in. The whys, the whats, the wheres, the whens, the whos. These are secondary triggers. So she said, but there's thousands of them. And I said, yeah, so I need to put my mind to this. And 3 months later, I suddenly said, we can divide them into 4 categories. And the 4 categories are unwanted emotions, such as fear, unwanted thoughts, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Unwanted physical feelings in the body, squirmy tummy, tightness in the chest, or unwanted images, failure, humiliation, embarrassment, or dying. Now, some people get one trigger, and that is called mild anxiety. Some people get 2 triggers at the one time, and that is called moderate anxiety. If you get 3 at the one time, that is called severe anxiety. And if you manage to get all 4 at the one time, that's actually called a panic attack. They're apparently awful. I've never had one, but everyone who's had one tells me they're terrible. So we have to get rid of these triggers. Now, here's where we get a huge problem. As well as having 2 nervous systems, we have 2 minds. We have a conscious mind and a subconscious. The conscious controls the central nervous system, and the subconscious controls the autonomic. The conscious works with language, in my case, English. And the subconscious works with symbols and pictures. So when you put the word not in front of words, we can understand that. If I say, we are not in Australia, we can understand that. But when you've got a picture system and the word not, picture is still there. So if I say, please do not think about a pink elephant covered in big blue spots. Please do not think about the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Please do not think about the stretchy cheese on a pizza. And please do not think about the shape of India on the map. And you get these images instantly. Now, it gets worse because all the verbal negations, no, not, less, without, or none, can't work with the picture system. So we have to find a different way. And that's when I thought, well, why don't we try to relax, try to be calm? Now, what does try mean? And I ask people this, what does try mean? And they say, oh, attempt, endeavour, have a go, give it a shot, have a bash, do your best. But then I say to them, let me tell you that the subconscious knows that try means fail. And let me explain how you learned this. Back when you were 2, you were like a linguistic sponge, and you were learning approximately 10 new words a day. I know this because I've got a grandson of 2.5, and every week I see him, and his vocabulary has shot up enormously. So say you're in the kitchen and your mum drops a plate and she says, oh, Mary, say that's your name. The good plate dropped and it's smashed. So you hear, Mary, that's your name, you know it. The good plate, that's easy. Dropped, same as fell. And it smashed. Now, smashed is a brand new word because we don't give 2-year-olds smashable objects or toys. And smash belongs to a group of words which are called onomatopoeic. They sound like what they do. And 2-year-olds love the juiciness of onomatopoeic words. So what they do to memorize it is they do a deep indrawing of breath. So there's room on the out breath to repeat the word 5 times. Now, it's not 4 and it's not 6. It is always 5. And what they do is they go, smashed, mummy, smashed. Oh, look, smashed. Bad, smashed. Oh, smashed, mummy. And those 5 iterations, they've memorized it. Now, a week goes by and mum drops another plate. But this time she says, oh, Mary, the good plate dropped. I tried to catch it, but it smashed. And she adds in this new clause, I tried to catch it. But she says it in a slightly different tone of voice from the rest of the sentence. It's called a rising inflection. So see if you can hear it. Oh, Mary, the good plate dropped. I tried to catch it, but it smashed. Now, parents always do a rising inflection in their voice for what they think are good things. I'll buy you some chocolate. I'll take you to the circus. We'll go and meet your friends. You can have a new ball. And for bad things, parents always do a lowered inflection in their voice. Mary, you're going to have to go to the dentist. And you'll get a little injection in your mouth. And I want you to eat your Brussels sprouts. I'm sure you love them. And some children hear that and go, I don't like Brussels sprouts. You've never had Brussels sprouts. I still don't like them. Now, a week goes by and mum drops another plate. But this time she says, oh, Mary, the good plate dropped. But I caught it. When we're successful, we never say that we tried. Never. The only time you hear someone say, try, trying, or tried, is when there's failure. It's the only time. And before you reach the age of 5, you heard your parents say, try, trying, or tried, always meaning failure, more than 1,000 times. And if you had the misfortune to attend a New Zealand primary school, I don't know about Indian ones, but a New Zealand one, in primary elementary school alone, you hear it on average 10,000 times. That's incredible. Class, I want you all to try and draw a big circle. Instead of class, I want you all to draw a big circle. Now, we can't get rid of these with no, not, less, without, or none. And we can't get the opposite no matter how hard we try, endeavour, have a go, give it a shot, have a bash. And my wife said, so are you going to give up? And I said, you know me. I don't give up. And she said, that's the reason I married you. You don't give up. But it took me 8 years to figure out a solution. 8 long years. And one day I realized that what you could do is get in the conscious mind a wanted emotion, thought, feeling, and image to displace and replace an unwanted one in less than 1 second. And that works. It is amazing. It's called the 4-finger technique. So then I said to my wife, there you go, 9 years, and we've got it. And she said, how do we get the triggers? And I said, oh, by thinking like a pessimist. I know that one. And she said, well, do optimists get anxiety? And I said, no, not really. It's pessimists who get anxiety. So then I picked up a book called The Optimistic Child, written by Martin Seligman. And it blew me away because it made me realize that it was possible to think like an optimist. You see, there's one grammar rule that separates the two. It's called the 3 Ps. When something goes wrong, pessimists go personal, permanent, and pervasive. As in, it's my fault, it's always going to happen, and it affects everything that I do. And optimists do impersonal, temporary, and specific. And when things go well, it flips round, and pessimists go impersonal, temporary, and specific. And when something goes well, the optimists go personal, permanent, pervasive. Yeah. So I encourage them to get hold of that book, and we don't need to do a session on that because I want to cure their anxiety in just 5 sessions. So now we're at session, there's the intake, there's the parasympathetic, that's session 2, there's the displacement and replacement in session 3. Now, anxiety is caused by having a mistaken belief and then making the mistake of believing it. Let's me express it in one sentence. Having a mistaken belief and then making the mistake of believing it. So what I realized over the years was that some of the mistaken thoughts managed to slip through the cracks. So I devised this lie detector technique to spot when you're tricking yourself. And that works really, really well. Because if you don't have any unwanted thoughts, and if you do get some, but you don't believe them, It can't grow into anxiety. So I said to my wife, there you go. That's now been 14 years. And I think I've got it. And she said, does that cure all people with anxiety? And I said, well, it cures 80%, but there's 20% who are improved, but not completely cured. Where is the flaw in my logic? And she said, you've just pessimistically assumed that it's your fault. What if the 20% had another factor that you haven't taken into consideration yet? And I said, oh, I could kiss you. That is astonishing. You've just saved me ages. And she said, what could the other thing be? And I said, well, it's what I don't do in the intake session. I don't ask a single question about history, triggers, severity, or duration of symptoms. Not at all. When they say they've got anxiety, they've got anxiety. They don't want anxiety. So the 20% who were improved but not completely cured had significant emotional baggage in the past. So I devised this technique to park all of that emotional baggage with no discussion or disclosure of problems whatsoever. And that takes the cure rate for anxiety up to 100%. Now, I've only done this with 15,000 people, and it's worked for all of those 15,000. So I would love to say this is the cure for anxiety, but it's only 15,000. So there may be an exception somehow. Now, that's a typical intake session that I do. How many questions have I asked the patient? Virtually none. Name and address. What's your problem? Anxiety. And then I launch into 95% of the discussion. If I was to ask you what should be the therapist's goal for the intake session, this is the session which is least talked about in hypnosis. We learn about techniques and methodology and yes sets and binds of comparable alternatives, all this kind of stuff. But that all comes in the second session or third session. If they never come back, you don't get a second session or a third session. What brings people back is hope and expectancy. And having listened to that, does that generate a bit of hope and expectancy? I think it does. You see, if all you do is take a detailed history and make a diagnosis, you might feel, oh, I'm wonderful. I've taken a detailed history and I've made the diagnosis. They've got anxiety. Yeah. Severe anxiety. But you might never see that patient again. If you can't cure the anxiety in a single session, you have to see the patient several times. In my case, it's 4 more times. And after those 5 sessions, they should be cured. Now, when I devised this, it took me 25 years to devise it. And my wife said, well, you know, the next thing you have to do, you have to write it down in a book, because somebody will come after you. And if you haven't got it written down somewhere, then it's going to be lost. So I sent the manuscript to the top publisher in New Zealand, who said, oh, you have to change the title. I said, what's wrong with the title? And he said, well, you've written How to Cure Anxiety in Just 5 Therapy Sessions. You can't have the word cure. People won't buy it. And I said, mate, I've spent 25 years figuring out how to cure it. I'm putting cure in the title. And he said, well, we've read the book and we agree that this is the cure for anxiety. But we're not big enough to market it. So I said, well, who is? And they said, well, the Americans. I said, who's the biggest publisher in America? And they told me. And I sent them it. And they phoned me up straight away and said, perfect time. A huge increase in anxiety with COVID. And in February the 15th, out it came, How to Cure Anxiety in Just 5 Therapy Sessions. The intake session is the first session. Parasympathetic predominance is the second session. And in the book, I've written that traditionally, anxiety is like a box of chocolates. And every chocolate's got a different coloured wrapper. And I was trained, as all of you were trained, to study the wrapper that each person has. Those things that make them an individual. But underneath the wrapper of every chocolate, there is always cocoa, butter, sugar, and flavouring. And under the wrapper of anxiety, there is always sympathetic overactivity. We get rid of that. Unwanted thoughts that bother us, we get rid of that. Pessimistic thinking, we get rid of that. Making the mistake of believing it, we get rid of that. And as for the pesky, all-important wrapper, what if we just scrunch it up and toss it in the bin? So then my question is, when do you want to come back for the next session? And most say, how soon can you see me? And that is the proof that you've generated hope and expectancy. So let me stop there. So there's plenty of time for asking questions. I do apologize for holding things up at the start. I've moved to another computer and this seems to be working very well. So
Thank you, sir, for your excellent deliberation on linguistic particularly. And we'll take the questions later on. Please be with us if there is any. Thank you. Over to Neeti.